is making a comeback.
This week, prominent black conservative Alan West blasted corporate leaders and the NFL for, quote, cowering to Black Lives Matter. He says they are acquiescing and surrendering to a Marxist mob, which is what BLM is. West also stated that, quote, these people don't have the courage to stand up and say what needs to be said. Liberty Nation's socio-political correspondent Jeff Charles joins us with some insight and background on this increasingly dicey situation. Welcome to Truth TV, Jeff.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
All right, let's begin by running Alan West's comment, and then I'll let you have the floor.
So what do you make of these athletes, Alan West, and these coaches and these commissioners, all now taking a knee to Black Lives Matter?
Well, again, it's very appalling that you would have these corporations and businesses, and you have these sports franchises like the National Football League that are cowering and acquiescing and surrendering to a Marxist mob, which is what Black Lives Matter is. You know, this past week I did a video in response to what Brett Favre said in his comparative analysis that Colin Kaepernick would go down as a hero just the same as Pat Tillman. Pat Tillman was a man who quit the NFL and decided to join the Army, enlist in the Army, become an infantryman, an airborne ranger, and was, sadly killed in a friendly fire incident in combat in Afghanistan. Now, how do you make that comparison to someone like Colin Kaepernick? The only reason why Brett Favre does that, the only reason why someone like Drew Brees apologizes or Roger Goodell gets on his knees, the only reason why you have the head of Chick-fil-A talking about white people need to shine the shoes of black people is because they don't have their courage to stand up and say what needs to be said. They continue to believe that you can appease a mob. The mob will never be happy. And the leader of Black Lives Matter said they will burn the system down. You cannot negotiate and you cannot meet someone like that on an ideological field and believe you can have reasonable discourse.
Okay, Jeff, have at it.
Okay, so I definitely understand what Alan West is saying, and I actually agree. I mean, I will say that the NFL is kind of finds himself in an awkward position here, right? Because either way they go, they're damned if they do, damned if they don't. If they don't allow a lot of the protesting to happen, they alienate half of their audience. If they do the opposite, they lose half of their audience, and that's what happened when the whole thing with Colin Kaepernick really became a focal point in the culture. But I mean, when Alan West talks about Black Lives Matter, I mean, yeah, the national organization is very much a Marxist organization. It has been co-opted by progressives. So it doesn't make any sense to kowtow to them. Now, there is a difference between the national Black Lives Matter organization and then the organizations that you see on the local level. That's where it gets a little bit more complex. But when we're talking about the overall push that the white progressives are really pushing, not black people, then yeah, that is a Marxist organization, and you should never give in to that particular segment.
All right. I'm wondering, are there any voices out there that you think are adding a productive dialogue to the discussion these days?
Well, when it comes to the NFL, I think it's really hard to be productive. I mean, I think that there are reasonable people, even on the left, who want to discuss the issue. But I think everything has been hijacked by the fringes. So really, when you're talking about the protesting and the police brutality, you're basically hearing from the fringes. But I think that there are people who really want to have a serious conversation about this. I mean, even on the right, I've heard a lot of conservatives say that they don't necessarily disagree with what Colin Kaepernick was protesting against. They just disagree with the way he did it. And I kind of find myself in that camp because I think he did more harm than good with that, regardless of what his intentions were.
Well, you tend to be a common sense guy. What do you believe to be the common sense approach to folks running wild in the streets, tearing down statues and whatnot? In other words, what do you think is the best way to handle this situation thus far?
Yeah, so I mean, we see what happened in South Carolina when Nikki Haley was governor. They had the issue with the Confederate flag. They put it to a vote. Their government voted to take it down, and that's what happened. We just saw that happen in Mississippi as well. It'll be the last state to, if they do remove it, which it looks like they're going to, they'll be the last state to have removed it. But they didn't do it by just tearing the flag down. They went through the process. So anybody who's out there tearing statues down, and especially since these people don't really care about the issue anyway, I mean, if you're tearing down statues of Abraham Lincoln, then you don't really care about this issue. Those people should be locked up and thrown in prison. Like, you don't get to just vandalize public property and enforce your will through force and violence.
Well, it's interesting because just what you're talking about is what Mitch McConnell has suggested for Kentucky. He said, let's go through a process. Let's discuss this. And let's take our time and not have a knee-jerk reaction. Is that what you're basically saying?
Yeah, that is what I'm saying. I mean, that's the way political discourse in America is supposed to go. I understand that there might have been times where this behavior might have been appropriate, like during the Revolutionary War, things like that. But that shouldn't be applied to every single situation. And in a situation like this, it's best to do it on the battlefield of ideas.
All right, in Missouri, we have a strange story developing over a couple in a, I guess, rather nice neighborhood who saw protesters coming. I guess it was a gated community. The gate came down. I don't know when and how, but pick up the story from there for our viewers.
Yeah, so basically there was a group of about 500 Black Lives Matter protesters, and they did break down the gate. So I definitely fault them there. They were there to protest the Democratic mayor for some misbehavior that she had gotten involved in. She had doxxed some of the protesters, basically. So they were there to protest her for that. The problem is that was a private community. That wasn't a public area. So they're going through the neighborhood, and as they're walking by, this couple came out of their house, and this is a very affluent, well-to-do area. So these are like, 5-story mansions, that kind of thing. And they came out, and it was just the funniest sight to see a guy in a polo shirt and his wife. He came out with an AR-15, and his wife with her pistol. And I've never fired a handgun, but I knew that they were handling those firearms wrong. So they probably should get some training or something. And I probably wouldn't have come out on the lawn like that. But at the same time, tensions are really high right now, and the media is really ginning up racial tension. And we've seen some members of Black Lives Matter destroying property and getting violent. So they were on edge, and they had every right to be. They had every right to defend their home. They didn't shoot anybody. They didn't hurt anybody. But yet the left-wing mob still came after them online and doxed them, exposed their address, exposed their business, exposed their Yelp site where people can go on and leave reviews. They went on and left 1-star reviews, calling them racist and yada, yada, yada. They really got the raw end of the deal here, and it just became ridiculous, but it's indicative of how the left works, right? They don't just come at you with arguments. They want to destroy you, and that's what they're trying to do to this couple.
Who have you heard in the Black community that you believe is making the most sense these days?
Senator Tim Scott. Anytime that question comes up, he's my answer. I mean, there are other people too, but I mean, I'm a huge fan of Senator Tim Scott. I know he's trying to do a lot of good about, the issue of police brutality. I'm not sure how much needs to be done at the federal level, because I'm always leery of that. But I love that he has an honest voice on it. He doesn't play down racism, but he also doesn't exaggerate it. He's not afraid to talk about it in an honest way. Love the guy.
One of the things I'm concerned about, and I was talking about this earlier with our managing editor, Mark Angelides, nobody's done a count, but I wonder how many Black lives have been snuffed out as a result of this. I mean, you look at just this last weekend in the Chaz Chop Seattle thing. It's a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old. Both of them are Black. I think some counting is in order here.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's why the Black Lives Matter organization does need to be held accountable. And I think that the people in that organization that are good people who I might disagree with on certain areas, those are the people I need to step up and repudiate this nonsense. Because when people do this stuff and they represent them and they're getting Black people killed, now you can't say that Black Lives Matter because you are willing to put Black lives at risk, and it's ridiculous.
Exactly. That's Liberty Nation sociopolitical correspondent Jeff Charles. Thanks for joining us on Truth TV today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Truth is making a comeback.